Okay, welcome to another episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Dai-shihan Miller here from Warrior Concepts here in East Central Pennsylvania. So if you're in the area, by all means, stop by and see us. Today's topic, we're going to take a look at combat in close quarters, right? Also known in the self-defense world as CQC, close quarter combat, right? But specifically what I want to take a look at today is why the Bujinkan's Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, one of the 9 schools within the Bujinkan, is perfectly suited for and built for real world 21st century self-defense, given certain conditions, of course, right? Anything can serve any purpose, but again, we want to make sure that we're clear about where we are. Okay, so as usual, I like to start off with a problem that we need to see things. We need to seek a solution to. Okay, I think it would help folks. Again, just my humble opinion. It would help folks if they looked at self-defense, survival, those kind of things, as a problem solution paradigm, as opposed to this vague, I want to learn how to fight, I want to learn how to defend myself, and then anything will do. Okay. Well, anything could do given the situation, right? But here's where I'm going with this today. Most martial artists, right? Most self-defense students, practitioners, right? Often without even realizing it, are subconsciously or very likely subconsciously preparing for the wrong kind of fight, right? So what I mean by that is whether they're training in a dojo or a ring, right? Or even, I don't know, they're out somewhere, right? Reenacting common self-defense scenarios. Could be a classroom, whatever, right? The vast majority of practice happens where? It happens in open space, right? I remind my students all the time, dojo, this is an open sanitary space. And I don't mean sanitary because we keep it clean. What I mean is there's no trip hazards. The floor is even and smooth. There's all kinds of things that have been removed that probably aren't going to be removed in the world, right? And again, the real world doesn't give you a sparring ring. It doesn't give you a nice sanitary space, right? It gives you hallways, narrow stairwells. It might put you between parked cars or the space between tables at a restaurant. Okay. And if that weren't bad enough, right, you might not just be defending or protecting yourself, right? You might be with someone. You might be with a loved one, a child, significant other, right? Or you might step in to help somebody else, a stranger who's being threatened, okay? So the point here is that this changes everything. This changes everything from even what most people do when they think that they are, I've heard this, right? The ring or the sparring arena or whatever is the best place to test your skills. What skills? What kind of environment? What kind of situation are we talking about testing our skills in? Because it's not the same, right? For instance, when I'm teaching, let's say it's defensive combat handgun. And so we'll do some classroom things where people get to dry fire and they practice, reload and things like that. Everything's safe. There's no ammunition involved or anything like that. So we'll do that in the morning, and then the afternoon we'll go out to the range, and they get to practice those skills, typically against stationary targets. Now, sometimes we'll set up what I call a Hogan's Alley, or what is often called a Hogan's Alley, where there are targets at different ranges, right? Different distances, angles, things might be in the way. We'll go out to a range that we use that we can set 6 or 8 targets up where things are the view, the vision, the lines of sight and all that are blocked until you get to a certain area. And then there might be brush or whatever, right? And so they get to do that a little bit, but they're moving and the targets are stationary, right? There's another area of training that we do, especially when it has to do with like getting offline while drawing the weapon and engaging the target. And we'll do a form of paintball, right? Because now we know what it means to miss. We know what it means to get nailed by these things, right? They sting like a son of a bitch. And there's a range, at least it was there before COVID. We haven't used it since then. Probably about an hour and a half from the dojo, where it's an indoor range, like paintball, but you could also use the pellet versions, right? Those little stinging pellet kind of things, airsoft, right? And you can reenact, right? Urban survival scenarios in a building, clearing a building, workplace violence, those kind of things, all different, right? So when I say same core skills, these kind of scenarios expose skill areas that people are often lacking. All right. So anyway, before I go much deeper into this, I have to do my obligatory, my social media guy reminds me all the time. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all those kind of things that help us out, help program the algorithm, make sure that you're getting notified when we put more of these things up. And also it gets the platforms to share this stuff with other people who could absolutely use this information. Okay. All right. That being said, let's start off with 3 critical problems that most systems don't prepare you for, right? So here's where we start pushing buttons because everybody believes that their system is best. Okay. I would never say that ninjutsu is better than anything else. I know that's shocking to a lot of people too, right? But that's what you do. Yeah, I know. But why do you do it? Well, see, I think the biggest advantage that ninjutsu gives a student that others don't, which is why MMA and shit like that was invented, is because ninjutsu gives a student more options without having to shop around and go to 5 different martial arts or 3 martial arts and a meditation class and a yoga class. There's just more options. Okay. So better, I don't know. Okay. I've done my fair share of other things, but I don't play that game. Okay. This is about strategic thinking, tactical operation, and technical proficiency with the skills that are necessary in the moment. Okay. You can train all day long, every day, and still lose because some sniper shot you from across the street. It's just the nature of warfare. It's the nature of being a warrior. Okay. All right. So let's look at these 3 critical problems. Okay. That again, in my opinion, my experience in the world, most programs aren't preparing people for. Right. And the first one is that shit happens in tight spaces. Okay. And if you're not completely boxed in, there's still a wall, or there's furniture, or there's changing space kind of things, right? This is true when I was a cop. This is true when I was a meek little kid getting beat up almost every day in school and after school. Tight spaces, okay? It is not a big open area. People didn't move a bunch of shit out of the way, so there's nothing in your way, man. For what? For you to trip over. You know, coincidentally, or maybe ironically, if you look at any of the old movies, right? We're talking like from the 50s on back, I would say, right? Before judo got here, before karate got here, before taekwondo got here, before, right? And then even the space monsters were doing freaking taekwondo and stuff like that. If you look at those old black and white movies, when a fight happened, right, it was a slugfest, or they would tackle each other, and they would go tumbling over furniture and knock into things. Not that other movie fight scenes aren't like that today, but those fight scenes looked more just rough and tumble, like shit on the street, and less choreographed. Interesting, right? So anyway, tight spaces. Okay, let's take a look at just a couple of these things. Just a couple of points, right? Think about this: sport fighters, right, train and spar where? In rings. Okay, so not only is there a paradigm, but there's nothing else in the way. If there's anybody else in the way, it's a ref, right, who's making sure that it's a fair fight. Okay, even schoolyard fights. Think about these. Even schoolyard fights get space that's created by the crowds. People will back up, man, give them space, right? And then, video cameras are out or whatever's going on, right? But space is created. And if the shit started before recess or lunch or after school or whatever, and somebody said 3 o'clock, right? Meet me in the parking lot, okay? they were already waiting, or somebody was waiting in a space where it was open grass, or they weren't, again, between parked cars, things like that, right? Okay. But if we think about worst case scenarios, not even worst case scenarios, the guy shoots you from a freaking clock tower, 200 meters away, and you never hear it coming, right? But ambushes, assaults, violent encounters, all kinds, right? They often happen in confined spaces, right? You barely have the space to move, right? A lot of people for years have been surprised that in our module one of the first things we teach people how to do is to do what we typically call a shizen high block, which is still just another uke nagash. It's an uke dome, right? It's this high block from shizen. And they're like, that's not in the Bujinkan. Yeah, I beg to differ. Yes, it is. Okay. However, like everybody's used to the moving and the naname and the angles and whatnot, right? Why do you teach that? Well, really simple. Doesn't matter if it's somebody who's brand new, who has no skills yet, right? And so they're probably going to be, behind the curve when things happen. Or it's somebody at my level or anybody's high level where we don't have the time or the space to move. And we've got to do something to stop that thing from hitting us in the skull or stabbing us or whatever, right? So we have to think about reality, okay? Most martial artists, most self-defense people, right? They don't train for environmental constraints, right? And their techniques end up falling apart in real scenarios because of that, right? We're going to talk about this one school, Takagi-Yoshin school today, and a lot of the techniques. Same thing with the Shinden Furoryu, which I'll talk about briefly. A lot of the attacks start with either you and your assailant in a seated position, or you in a seated position and your assailant in a standing position. So you're starting from a disadvantaged position to begin with. Now, in the old days, you were sitting in zagamai or something like that, fudoza. So you didn't have furniture to worry about, but in today's world, chances are, right? Not only are you in a disadvantaged position, but you're already dealing with an obstacle that you just happen to be sitting on. So it's like what? Under you and at least behind you, if not also on two sides. Right? Really important pieces of context. Okay. Second one that most don't deal with, right, is protecting someone else. Right? It's not about you. You're either inserting yourself into a situation to save somebody who's being threatened or is already being attacked, or maybe you are the intended target, but you're out with your wife, husband, child, friends, whatever, right? If I do the technique absentmindedly, right? No, sensei. I'm aware. Yeah, about as aware as we are in the dojo. As long as he hits the ground and I got him locked up and feel all warm and fuzzy, it's all good. But what if on the street I do things with that same mindset and drop that 250-pound MMA fighter on my 6-year-old grandson? Well, that's fucked up. All the way around, right? So what if I need to protect somebody else? What if I need to keep them away? In a past life, right, I did bodyguard work. In a law enforcement context, outside of law enforcement context, as a licensed private investigator, I did that kind of stuff. And so I don't only have to defend or protect this person, but I have to be able to drop this person that's attacking or pass him off to secondary security as quickly as possible so I can go back to where? Protecting the person who writes the check. Okay? But what if in the process of taking this guy down or scuffling with him, I or he or both of us trip over the principal and, they get broken or dead, or what do they call it in social platforms so that we don't get unplatformed, unalived. Anyway, right? So I know contrary to popular belief for most people, okay, it's not always about you, okay? You may need to step in for someone under threat. You may need to shield a loved one. You may need to act as a formal or informal bodyguard, right? For family, for friends, for a stranger on the street that you're going to step in and help. Okay. And so this means that you don't just have to win, right? You have to do it in a way that protects space, that controls the attacker very, very quickly, right? And it doesn't cause collateral damage in the process, right? Really important, right? Third one, just making sure I stick to my notes here so I don't forget anything, right? Environmental control, okay? This is a use it or lose it kind of scenario, right? So most are not teaching because I talked about this open sanitary space, right? Environmental control. Not that I'm necessarily controlling the environment itself. I could be, right? Hooking one of these little plastic or metal chair legs or whatever, right? It might be in a restaurant, hook it with my foot as this guy comes in, move it in his direction, that kind of thing. But it's also controlling him so that certain things can't happen, right? So again, most people don't think about other than it's an obstacle and it gets in the way. Quick story here about things getting in the way. I was if you go to Japan to train. Now I don't know how it is now that Hatsumi Sensei has retired and other soke are in place or whatnot, but I'm assuming that this is going to hold true. Training in the dojo in Japan, while it is international, it's the international hub for everybody on the freaking planet who trains in the Bujinkan, who goes there to train, right? But there's a seasonal roller coaster that goes on. And what I mean by that is most of the year, right? You're either too cold because it's fucking wintertime, right? Or you're too hot and uncomfortable because of the 2 summers that Japan has. It's either really, really hot and humid, or it's hot, humid, muggy, and raining all the time, known as monsoon, okay? There are 2 pockets of windows, right? As winter gives way to spring, but before the first summer kicks in, right? And where that late summer breaks and it moves into autumn. And things get comfortable. And that is where there's this peak, right? And it is literally wall to wall human beings in the dojo, right? I have been in the dojo where in this fairly large area where there's cubbies and stuff to put your training gear and your civilian clothes and whatnot after you change your uniform and whatnot, where that packed full and it's 2 or 3 bags shoved into the same square, right? And then out in the foyer area, bags are 3 or 4 deep coming away from the wall and from floor to ceiling. And there's literally no room to move in the dojo. And so one year I'm there and I'm training with a training partner, and I'll position this way because this is how we work, right? So I'm here with my training partner, and right next to me was a kind of a junior student that must have belonged to the senior guy here who had, my kind of beard. I didn't have the salt and pepper then, but he's over here and he's got one of those belts that look like he put rocks in his belt into a dryer or a washer or whatever and just bang the shit out of it so he could look like whatever, right? So anyway, he's over here. And so we're training and we're like, trying to hold our position because bodies are pressing up against us. There's no space. Everybody's in the same condition, right? And so this master, after getting instructions from Hatsumi Sensei that we are wall-to-wall people, right? You're going to have to understand how to work with that lack of space. He kept pushing my training partner. And then if I came in here or whatever, then, he's pushing us and whatnot. And I'd look at him and he goes, people need to give us some fucking space. And I said, I don't know where you think anybody's getting any space. You're in no different position than anybody else, except that you're up against a wall. I thought that belt meant something. Well, then he was pissed off at me for the rest of class, but that's okay. We didn't have to train together and neither of us had to hit the other person. Okay. But he was trying to create space where none existed. And he had no clue about how to use it to make his cool taijutsu work the way he was proud of. Okay. Now, I'm not knocking him. Somebody or somewhere along the line forgot to tell him that the real world doesn't work like a safe space. right? So most this kind of goes back to most martial artists don't train for environmental constraints, but most people don't think about how walls, how corners, how furniture can work for or against them. Okay. Um, in a really bad situation. And some of you guys have probably already been in self defense situations. The trick is to make sure that your training in this conforms to that so that you can tell other people, or if you become a teacher, you can tell students honestly, right, that you didn't just learn this stuff and you don't just have real world experience. You've used the stuff that you're teaching them in real world experiences against really bad people. Okay. If you can make that claim, now I'm not telling you to go out and get that experience. However, if you can make that claim, right, that's you don't get more solid than that. Okay. Anyway, so but the point is with this environmental control, right, you may need to step in, right? You may need to prevent your attacker from grabbing a chair, from grabbing a weapon, right? We have a dojo invader policy at my dojo. What that means is some dipshit comes in and decides he's going to challenge me or whoever's teaching class, right? So we have a policy. We have a procedure here where somebody drifts toward the phone, somebody drifts toward the door, and somebody drifts toward the weapons racks, right? While the teacher is trying to de-escalate, negotiate, those kind of things, right? Because if shit goes sideways, right, we're already calling 911 because the first one to make the call establishes the baseline. Okay? We're watching the door just in case Jackwagon has friends waiting outside. Okay? And we want to make sure that the cops can get in or know, where to find us and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Not because we're going to make sure he can't get back out. Anyway, and we want to make sure that the weapons rack is guarded. 2 reasons. 1, to keep him from getting at them. And 2, if things start to go sideways for us, that guy can hand me one and I can go, oh, well, look how things are getting interesting. Okay. And I think that, and I got this from one of my teachers, and his take on it was any person who is running a martial arts school that does not account for dojo invaders, for the jackwagon that's going to come in and try to make a name for themselves, shut you down, send you to the hospital, prove himself, whatever, and you don't have something in place, is not teaching self-defense even before they step out on the floor. Okay? Because they're not protecting something that they built. They're not protecting their students properly. Of course, they're not protecting themselves. Okay? But again, I took him at face value and it made sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else, right? Of course, we're all going to do whatever we want to do, right? So anyway, the other thing too is when I'm applying a technique, right? If we're not doing anything to recognize that in tight spaces, he can use a wall or a piece of furniture for support to stop our throw or to stop our technique or to regain his balance and kind of press up against it, throw himself back into the fight, that kind of thing. Again, we're not paying attention, or unconsciously we fell into what we call dojo syndrome. And so whatever happens in this open space, because we're staying away from walls, we're staying away from obstacles and all that, then we never have a reason to take them into account. But we should. Because unless you live in a monastery-like house and you have no furniture, you have nothing to trip over, or your workspace is that way, or wherever you park your car, everything is completely open all the way around it. There's no, your kids haven't left Legos, the dogs haven't left their toys, whatever. Shit laying all over the place that you could step on, trip over. Then you're good. You can ignore the rest of this, right? They also tend to not train for the fact that we may want to drive him into that wall or that car or that door frame or that corner to help end things much faster. Right? So again, if you don't train for this on purpose, it's not that it might not come out, but one of my teachers used to say, if you don't put it in, it's not coming out. What's coming out under pressure, under the adrenal response, is top of mind stuff and your habitual routine. The stuff you do all the time. Okay? It's just the way we're wired. Okay? So again, if you don't train for this on purpose, your technique, these kind of things that I just mentioned, become optional, right? At best, and dangerous at worst, because if we didn't plan for them, the old saying, if you're in the military or you did any operations kind of stuff, this saying that says, if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. And that means leaving holes in any part of our training. Okay. All right. So I guess this would be a good transition point, right? So, ta-da! Enter the Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, right? Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, right? It's one of the 9 schools of the Bujinkan. Okay, it is a ryu of close quarters combat. Most people know it as Jutaijutsu. Okay, but most people think of Jutaijutsu as grappling, where Dakan Taijutsu is striking. It's not that cut and dry, right? Unlike many classical systems, or modern ones for that matter, Takagi-Yoshin Ryu was built from the ground up for these conditions. Okay, for these conditions, right? It's been called and has been used as a specialty during certain eras as a bodyguard school. Okay, which automatically means that it's not about you; it's about somebody else that you're protecting. Okay, but it's also, when I say close quarters combat, it's built for small areas, small passageways, small rooms, right? The average height of a Japanese warrior during the Sengoku Jidai Warring States period, when a lot of this stuff was formulated, was the imperial system, 4'2", 4 feet 2 inches. Okay? I'm a freaking giant. Okay? So that means that buildings were smaller, spaces were smaller, that kind of thing. One year I took my students to this mountain in Japan where this one warrior school came from, that was the crux, or the center of a very popular new Japanese TV show. And I took them up there, and while they had built, this is out in the middle of nowhere, literally when the bus pulled in and stopped, we were not on paved surface, right, at the bus station. But right in front of us was this brand new modern museum, right, of warriorship, dedicated to this particular lineage. Okay? It's the most modern thing in the area. Okay? Behind it was this giant airplane hangar-looking dojo, because one of their specializations was halberd and spear. So they had this indoor dojo that was just really tall, really wide. Even the doors folded closed. Again, very much like an old style airplane hangar. And then adjacent to that was a school of military strategy. And it looked like it was built for preschool kids. Low building, very small rooms, table. I'm thinking, is this like individual rooms for each person who's No. There had been 3 or 4 of them sitting around each one of these tables. And each one of these little rooms, a different class was being taken, or they were studying certain things or whatever, right? Very, very small. Okay. Not like most of us in the West are used to. Okay. If we want to look at something by comparison, right? For most of us, a hanbo, right, 3 feet tall, a meter, right, is about hip level. Now, if you're way taller than me, I'm 5'6" and change. So if you're way taller than me, then it's a little bit lower, and you have to kind of bend to touch it. So I always tell people, add a couple inches to that so you can stand normally, right? But that's what we're used to. We're used to seeing that like a cane. Okay. But if I were 4'2", then a 3-foot stick is going to come almost to shoulder length. That puts a different spin on what hanbo techniques look like, as opposed to Joe techniques that could be 4 or 5 feet high. See, now you're looking at a 6-foot staff relative to me, and then a 6-foot staff. Okay. Different context. Okay. So, again, here we are as Westerners, way, way taller than the people who created this stuff, but we're still using weapons based on the dimensions written in old text, based on the people's height during that period. If we were going to do this traditionally, if we were going to do this authentically, then the weapons that we're using that and the techniques that we're learning from them should be increased in size to match the height to height person's height to weapon length ratio of the two different things. We get that by learning or studying history. Okay. All right. So Takagi-Yoshin, right? So again, this has been called the Bodyguard school, but it was also designed for very, very close spaces. Okay. So this Ryu, we'll take a look at 4 of their specializations here, right? So first one is in controlling the attacker, right? Controlling without needing space. Oh, they're connected. Awesome. Okay. It's about controlling the attacker or an attacker without needing space. Remember I guess technically he's my peer. Anyway, specializes in dropping him straight down at your feet, not projecting him outward when you're throwing, locking, knocking him down, those kind of things, right? So we are dropping straight down. And we drop him down at our feet. So we can drop a knee on him and get that restraint happening right away. Okay. Because again, tight spaces, if I got to do a standard ganseki or something like that, and when his balance breaks, he can stick his free hand out and put it up against a car window or a door or a wall or something like that. And now he's got this brace to resist this throw. Okay. So if you know Ganseki Nage and you know it's 3 base variants, Ganseki Osai, Ganseki Ori, and Ganseki Otoshi, Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, more typically than not, would use Ganseki Otoshi, dropping a big rock, and Ganseki Osai, breaking a big rock. Okay? You just break him in place, collapse things, break his arm and or his leg or whatever. You just start breaking parts of his body. Okay, but see that description might lead you into believing that we're talking about force on force. Okay, no chikara karabe. It's not direct application of force. Okay. This one's going to sound very familiar to everybody, but it doesn't always mean the same thing, right? We're moving off angle. Okay. Not just against punches and kicks. Okay. When he grabs me, those kind of things, right? So moving off angle, not to escape. And this is the difference. In the Daken Taijutsu, Koppo, Koshi, those kind of things, when we move naname, when we move off angle, right, it's an escape. It's an evasion to move, to remove the targets from his access, right? This is not to escape. It's to shield, it's to suppress, and it's to redirect, okay? Because human beings work best inside this triangle. We call this our power triangle, okay? And the closer the hands get to the sternum, the stronger we are. Okay? So I want to force him to work off that, not where the torso turns, off that. So not only does Takagi-Yoshin, when we're grabbed, do we move to break that and to suppress his strength and things like that, right? But we also enter. In Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, attacks, and I know people teach techniques like this a lot, where it's straight in, right? And it's not that there aren't some that are like that, because it overwhelms the person. They're in a disadvantaged position anyway, and it kind of gets them stuck. But if we're standing, right, a common approach in Takagi-Yoshin, they even have a kata named after this, ikichigai. Ikichigai means to pass by. So I'm walking, we just pass by each other, right? But as we're about to pass by, we insert ourselves at an angle, right, to screw up his ability to do certain things. Okay, this triggers proprioceptors and contradictory information to the brain, because we're not coming in on one line. A diagonal comes in on multiple lines, catches the brain, and the brain has to deal with not just the direction your body's going, but diminishing space, other parts of the body. It's interesting stuff. Okay, so we're moving off angle, and the last one is in using subtle movements. I'm gonna put down a phrase here. I call it this. Some of my friends call it this. This is not something that you will find literally in the scrolls. And so for those who are purists, if it doesn't say it in the scroll, then it's not right. I'm using English words and an analogy that is built into all the Takagi-Yoshin stuff, even though Takagi-Yoshin doesn't call it this. Okay? We call it the fluttering leaf. You know what a fluttering leaf is? You're walking somewhere, you're sitting somewhere, you're driving, and maybe it's autumn, and a leaf detaches from a tree and then flutters, right? Or maybe you see one of these little dandelion or other kind of wispy kind of parts from a plant. You know, it's matured, now it's kind of floating around, right? Or you're watching a bat or an insect and it's doing a thing, and all of a sudden it darts in a different direction. But this fluttering action catches your attention, kind of mesmerizes you for a second, right? And it takes your attention away from what you should be doing, right? Or what you were doing a second ago, okay? And so what we're doing is this thing to catch. Now, there is an ura to that in the Takagi-Yoshin view, which is to not get caught by the fluttering leaf. Not just his, but your own, okay? Not get so caught up thinking about your own technique that you're not paying attention to him, okay? But so we're using subtle movements like the fluttering leaf to draw attention, right? To tie up his mind, okay? To break his structure, onaji, at the same time, okay? At the same time, right? So we're not doing one thing to do one thing to do another thing to do another thing. No, we're feeding the brain multiple pieces of contradictory input at the same time. But we have to do it very subtly so it catches him and he doesn't just bail out of frustration or fear or concern or whatever. Okay. So today, again, during this class, what my goal is to introduce you to several of the key strategic and tactical principles that make Takagi-Yoshin Ryu one of the most underestimated and overperforming systems in the Bujinkan, especially when it comes to real self-protection and close quarter survival, close quarter combat, okay? But before we go further than this, right, if you've been around in training for a while, but still doing what I call the Bujinkan hybrid approach, okay? What I mean by that is where all the schools have been melded into a single identity or single entity or approach. It's perfectly fine, right? People have gotten really, really good at that thing, right? But if that's the case, then you may be wondering, like, what's the difference between the Takagi-Yoshin school's approach to Jutaijutsu and the approach that the Shinden Furoryu takes in its Jutaijutsu? Because we know that we have two branches of Shinden Furoryu and Bujinkan, right? There's a Daken Taijutsu branch and there's a Jutaijutsu branch. Do they combine? Sure, of course. Okay, but the Shinden Furoryu Jutaijutsu is the Bujinkan's other Jutaijutsu school, right? Again, if we're not careful, we're going to think that it's all the same thing. Okay, so my students have to learn the Bujinkan hybrid approach up to Shodan, and then after that, they have to learn a couple of lineages at a time to understand the different strategic approaches. That way, if what they're doing in a self-defense situation isn't working, they can switch, not techniques, they switch strategic approach. And if that's not working, they switch strategic approach. Most people can't switch once. Some can switch twice. We have the ability to switch at least 8 times, okay? Given that you started with an approach. Okay, 9 if you started with Bujinkan hybrid, and then you're going to split it out to a particular one. Okay, so very, very quickly, right? Just a quick kind of how they're different, right? So while both the Takagi-Yoshin and the Shinden Furoryu's they're both Jutaijutsu schools, right? what we might call their flavor and their focus are very different. Okay. Takagi-Yoshin Ryu is often called the Bodyguard school. I already mentioned that, right? It's built for close quarters, indoors, or in very, what we might call urban areas where, you get built up floors and streets and things like that, right? Okay. And so the throws are designed to like drop somebody straight down. So you can drop them right into quick control. Okay. Uh, let's see, what else do I have here? It's designed for the protection of others, those kind of things, right? This Shinden Furoryu, on the other hand, is the natural body school. Okay. It's designed for outdoors. It's designed for using raw posture, weight, terrain, those kind of things, right? To overcome with larger, more grounded movements, right? Where Takagi-Yoshin is more subtle and there's more nuance to it. Shinden Fudo is more raw. It's more grounded, right? And we're using the terrain to overwhelm, right? So one is like the willow tree, this wispy tree, right, in the courtyard that just kind of moves when the breeze is happening. And there are no hard corners to the branches, right? They just kind of droop down. They got this little arc shape and whatever, right? And the other one is the rock on the mountain. Okay. So it'll get moving naturally as well, and it'll bounce around based on whatever it's hitting, but you don't want it to land on you. Okay. Even if you're in a storm and the branches of a willow tree are whipping around, you're going to get whipped, right? But it's not like an oak tree that slams into you, that kind of thing, right? So while the Shinden Furoryu has its own powerful lessons for survival, right, in natural outdoor environments, not that it can't be used for indoor and things like that, but we're talking about like uneven ground, right? Those kind of things, unstable. You've got your We've got two small dogs, and my wife can't stop buying dog toys. So there's dog toys constantly being picked up, cleaned up, dogs dragging them back out, whatever. A blanket being pulled off the freaking bed, or a cover being pulled off the piece of furniture and whatnot, and come home and it's on the floor at the back door, all kinds of stuff, right? So that kind of thing, right? Takagi-Yoshin Ryu was designed for real close quarters, right? These kind of situations that most of us are more likely to face today, given urban areas. Okay. Now, if you're in the military, you find yourself in rough terrain and stuff like that, you got a different scenario. Okay. And can you bring them together? Of course, because you might be in terrain like that, but you might have to protect somebody, right? Takagi-Yoshin is more designed for, again, those tight quarters and the likelihood of having to protect somebody else, or at least be concerned about somebody else's, right? Where Shinden Furoryu, typically it's just you and you take care of business, right? And so that's where I want to focus our attention in this session, right? That's Takagi-Yoshin kind of situation, okay? Because these principles are not only unique, they're directly relevant to the world that you and I live in right now, okay? And for most of our time. I like to go camping and all those kind of things too, but for most of my days, I'm in a pretty built up, structured kind of area, right? So now, if there's enough interest, I can do another Whiteboard Wednesday session on the Shinden Ryu Jutaijutsu at some point, but that's okay. You can leave comments, you let me know. You can send an email if you catch me in class, or I don't know, one of the online things or whatever. You can always let me know if you're interested. If there's not enough interest, I'm not spending an hour or more working on something that nobody's interested in. Okay. All right. So, okay. So let's walk through 5 of these core principles within the Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, right? How they function and why you'll want to embody them long before we hit the mat, the tatami, right? Or worse yet, before we hit the street. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at these 5. It's all showing up on the screen. So first one, and this actually comes from the translation of part of the name, right? It's the willow's heart. So the willow's heart. All right. I mentioned the willow tree It's important. Okay. So Yoshin in Takagi-Yoshin, right? This means the will is hard. Takagi means tall tree, but we have to be careful because often people will gravitate to this like, right? No, Takagi was the name of the guy who organized this stuff. Oryomon Takagi was the family name. Okay. Yoshin, this is a principle. Okay. Um, so again, just it's just a quick kind of thing, right? Takagi-Yoshin Ryu does not meet force with force. Okay. There's this phrase, chikara kurabe, right? Which means force on force, right? It's like a contest, right? Two wrestlers trying to pin each other, that kind of thing, right? It's the let's do this and see what happens, okay? This is not a Takagi-Yoshin thing, right? Koto Ryu is way more like that, okay? And so this idea, right, of not meeting force with force means just like the willow tree, right? Just like the branches I was talking about, it bends, it flows, it redirects, those kind of things, right? Think Aikido without it being Aikido, okay? So to set the tone for this is not the fighter's ryuha, okay? This is for control. This is for strategic advantage. Okay. As a matter of fact, one of the key principles in the Takagi-Yoshin Ryu that I didn't feel the need to write down was that in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, one must and should do anything possible to not let things go physical. Right. It is the last option, and it is the least beneficial. It is the least strategically sound option, which sounds really contradictory to those of us who get involved in martial arts and self-defense because, somebody puts his hands on me, I'll put my hands on him. Okay. Except that now you're tied up. And from a position of protection, where I've got other people depending on me, whether they're in my space right now or they're expecting me to come back home, I put myself at risk and don't go home. Well, who do I expect is going to take care of them? The next guy that my wife fancies, or the next guy that my kids call dad. See, if we're really thinking about self-defense, this is different. Yeah. Okay. So Tanemura Sensei, head of the Genbukan, is, for those of you who don't know, is Hatsumi Sensei's cousin. I'm not even sure if they're still speaking today, but big old hoopah way back in the day. So, but I get information from all over the place, right? So Tanemura Sensei has said that Jutaijutsu is not about force. It's about controlling the enemy's body and spirit together until both yield, until both collapse. Okay? All right. So this, in and of itself, highlights the point that Takagi-Yoshin Ryu bends, flows, and redirects rather than meeting force head on. Okay? All right. Number 2, going to come back to the fluttering leaf. All right. And I left the cap off too long. Fluttering leaf. Okay. So again, this is not written in the scrolls. I and several friends came up with some terminology that would be quick and an analogy that would be quick for students to understand to get their head wrapped around it. But this came about from really immersing ourselves into the strategy and really looking at the techniques from a perspective that goes way beyond just the moves, right? And the technique is not the technique in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu. That's another principle in the Takagi-Yoshin Ryu. The technique is not the technique, okay? That means the model is not the thing, right? There's things that you're doing that you could do 50 other different ways for every single move in the kata. And that's not henka. It's producing a certain result or creating a certain moment, right? Okay? So what we're really talking about here with the fluttering leaf is perceptual distraction, okay? Perceptual distraction, Okay, so during this Friday's masterclass, right, there's the link for that, right? I'm going to be focusing heavily on a kata called kata munedori. Okay, single hand lapel uh, seizure, capture, grab. Okay, it's if not, I think it's the first kata in the scroll, and if it isn't, it's the one that I remember the most. Okay, we're going to focus on that, some variations. We might look at another kata or two, but there is so much in this one that embodies all these principles that it's only a 75 to 90-minute class. That'll keep us busy for a while. Okay, so in the katamune dori technique, right? There is what I call an S curve kind of thing, right? I equate this movement, like if we look at kotoryu, right, we're looking at 90-degree linear angles, or not 90, 45, 30-degree linear angles, and then we come back in, right? So we're constantly changing linear angles, right? Gyokko-ryu is more about orbiting, right? Going around, circling certain things, right? Flanking somebody, that kind of thing. Kukushinden Ryu torques a body to get their shoulder line off their hip line, off their foot line, to lock up the spine, and then breaks down through that unit, okay? Takagi-Yoshin movement is heavily based on that thing, right? The yin-yang. Huh? So it's this, see it? That S shape, okay? That I see vertically in the air. I see it on the ground. I see it at angles, okay? So for instance, in Katamuni Dori, the attacker reaches out, grabs my lapel, okay? First move is obviously to neutralize that so it doesn't happen, but while it's neutralizing, okay, hand comes up, catch his hand. This one comes around in an arc past his eyes, really close, past his eyes. You can even brush his face, okay? Not straight across, because the eyes will follow certain things, right? It's going to watch this line, okay? The brain does not process arcs, okay? For our human brain, you make a straight line, the brain jumps out in front of it. That's why we're able to point at things across space, and somebody looks. Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay? If you do that to your dog or cat, what do? Look at your freaking finger, or they ignore you altogether. Okay? But if you make an arc, the brain can't get ahead of it, so it has to follow it. Okay? So we do this. Okay? So we go around, and then we double back into the temple. Kind of rock his world, right? We'll look at more of this on Friday, but watch this. If I laid this on its side, see it? It's like I'm doubling back. Okay. Okay. So again, it creates a layered movement, and it affects perception in different ways. Also on Friday, we're going to take a look at how there's multiple of these things in the kata, and how each piece ties up the brain to allow the next thing to be invisible, like cutting through clouds, like cutting away mist, kind of like just trying to fan through the steam so you can see in the boiling pot of your pasta or whatever, just trying to clear things away, right? So there's other analogies and other lineages where you're doing a certain action or you're doing a certain thing to cut through the mist. Okay. Anyway, in this case, what we want to do is do things so that each thing that we do creates another perceptual gap, that so he can't see, feel, or pick up on the fact that you're doing the next thing. And then when he might be able to see that thing, we're doing something else. So he's always responding to something, not the thing that you're doing, which is why I have Takagi-Yoshin Ryu from my guys, from third to fourth and fourth to fifth dan. Takagi-Yoshin is up there with Togakure, because you're attacking their mind way more than you're attacking their body. Okay, and that's another big thing about attacking the body with Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, right? In training, we do very soft takedowns, but in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, you cause crashes. You need to debilitate him as quickly as possible. That's the key in the bodyguard world. In the bodyguard world, if I'm dealing with this person, I need to affect him very, very quickly with something that unbalances him. So I can do one of two things. I can either drop him and he can't get up quickly to move, and I can grab the principal and take off, right, or the protectee. Or I can do that thing, and when he's unbalanced, I can send him staggering towards secondary security. They grab him, they can wrestle with him and shit. My duty is to stay on this guy as quickly and as often as possible. If I get tied up in a fight like most people think of, or like you see in these freaking movies, right? Who the hell's watching the bodyguard, or who's watching the guy who writes the check? Well, of course, it's in the script. That person gets kidnapped, and now the bodyguard takes it upon themselves to go check. No, he's not. He may take it upon himself, but what you miss in the movie is he fucking got fired. Okay? So, yeah, it was true in 16th century Japan. It's true today. Okay? All right. So the distraction is the setup. It sets things up for the next piece. It's not just this flourish. Okay, it's not just this like. Okay? I have a student that every time he moves back into like an ichimonji thing, because he moved it back into something like that way back in the day as a ready stance, he has this Bruce Lee movement that's wired into his muscles. So he'll move back and then do this little. I can't even do it like he does, right? Just this little. But while you're busy doing that, it's a flourish, right? It makes it look like how martial arty I am. Okay, well, great. Just signal to the guy that you've got skills, so he just ramps up his intensity, or he pulls a weapon, or his friends see it and go, "Oh shit, he's going to need some help," and then 2 or 3 of them come rushing in to help this guy, and you just went from mano a mano to oh shit, Tsuki, right? So again, on Friday we'll take a look at how each step in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu often serves multiple functions. Okay, control, distraction, disruption. Onaji. Onaji is the Japanese word for same time. Okay, happens at the same time. Okay, a quote from Ishizuka Sensei. He just passed away. I'm going to miss him a lot. He said, "The goal is not to strike harder or throw faster. It is to take the heart of the opponent so resistance disappears." Okay, and this aligns perfectly with the principle of perceptual distraction, tying up the opponent's attention so he can't resist what comes next because he doesn't know what's coming next. Okay, all right. Next one is the principle of dropping somebody straight down at your feet. Right, so we drop them at our feet. And since back in the day, we'd have been wearing hakama, we drop him to our feet, and then he gets tangled up in that material. He can't see well. It's almost like dropping him into a net or a curtain, and then he can't see you well. All that stuff is going on, but you can pin him down with your knees, that kind of thing. But it has to do with close quarter stuff, right? If I do what Shinden Fudo does, or some of these other schools with throws and whatnot, and like with Shinden Fudo to you with a throw, because we're on mountainsides, we're on uneven terrain, rocky terrain, stuff like that, I'm going to toss this guy so his ukemi isn't dealing with a flat tatami mat or a floor or a flat grassy yard. It's rocky, or it's downhill, or there are trees or bamboo shoots or whatever that he's just going to slam into. Right? It's very different from, no. If I send him out, he's going to catch himself on something, maybe and grab something else and come back. No. I need to drop him straight down and control him from right here. Now I can activate Zanshin even more, pin him down, and start scanning to make sure, one, my protectee is still good. I can get a hold of them, hold them tight, right? Or I can scan and make sure nothing else is coming in at us. Okay? It's very, very different from just executing a throw, just to execute a throw. Okay? There's a point in training that's important, but not at this level. Okay? Right. So dropping them straight down. Right. So again, the Ryu developed for palace interiors, right? For narrow environments, right? Even small quarters, right? So we need to really understand, right? And this is why I'm emphasizing that throws that collapse the attacker vertically, right, to avoid wall interference and maintain and control space is ideal here, right? Okay. Same thing, parking lots, whatever, okay? And again, bodyguard function, right? I need to keep myself between the threat and the person I'm protecting. Right? I can't be just like moving around and doing whatever. Right? It's just it's it's not conducive to success. You could beat this person's ass and get that person broken, and getting fired is the least of your concerns. Because if you operate in certain realms like I used to, if you get fired from that one, the word gets around very, very quickly. You're not working again in those circles. Okay. Anyway, all right. Next one is called naname irimi. Naname irimi. Naname is angling. Naname is an angle or a diagonal. Irimi, right? Entering with the body. Okay. So naname irimi is off angle advantage. It's irimi is entering body. Naname is a diagonal or angling. Right. So it's taking the off angle advantage. Right. So strategic movement into the attacker's weak side or center where they're not able to be strong. They're not able to function quickly, strong. This is how we neutralize their strength, right? Anybody puts their hands on you, the first assumption you need to have is this person values their strength. They assume a level of strength, or they're grabbing you to use that as a fulcrum so they can pull against your resistance to help slam that punch into you even harder. Right? So, again, this is about tactical use for protecting a third party, obviously, right? Somebody else we're protecting because I'm going to enter in, right? I'm beside this person. Somebody's approaching them instead of me, and I enter forward, right? This kind of thing, right? So, or I'm shutting down an attacker's ability to draw or use their weapons, right? Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, again, it's not head on, right? If I were walking towards somebody with weapons, and whether I have weapons or not, right, they're going to go into defensive mode, right? So what I want to do is an ikichigai kind of thing where I'm walking past them, and then just before I get beside them, I'm going to sidestep over in front of them. So if he's wearing a sword or he's carrying a spear or something like that, right, and I enter in here, now my body's blocking this arm's ability to get to the sword. This one can't even draw the sword out single-handedly and stuff. So I'm in the way. So I went from off-angled to center, but I'm moving into center, not to fight him on center, but to put my body in the way of him being able to get at things. Okay. I was just covering this with one of my students who's a state trooper last night about, the average thug. She knows, right? They steal a gun, but they don't steal holsters, right? So the gun is either in the waistband or it's in a hoodie pocket, right? Those are the two primary positions that it's going to be in. And so when I'm approaching, I want to scan, right? And so where does it look like it might be? Well, if there's a big hoodie pockets are easy to tell. If there's something heavy laying in that, you can see that, right? So if it's there, I'm going to enter in on my left, their right, right? Because only 79% of the population is left-handed. So I'm going to enter in off-centered to my left, their right, because he would have to draw that weapon and get it over to me. Okay. The reason I don't do it to my right, his left, is because it's too easy for him to just put his hand on the weapon and turn it, press it into the material, and blow a hole in the hoodie pocket and shoot me. Okay. But if it's in the waistband, where he has to pull it up and it can get snagged on the elastic and all that kind of stuff, he has to pull it up to engage me, then I'm going to approach this way so I can move in and put him into a position where his arms are going to start to flail and he can't. It's harder for him to get it at that position. If I move in from this direction over here, he can step back and create space and let that happen. Okay, so just things, right? So with this one, let's see, tactical use, and then again, we need to think about those things so we can determine how we should train, right? Not just doing the kata, but understanding why the entry matters, why we're doing what we're doing the way we're doing it, and not, again, the technique is not the technique. The moves in the technique do something that is the control. Okay? That is the control. So when I ask what you're doing, to somebody brand new, they're going to go, I'm going to Ichimonji, I'm delivering this counter strike, and then I'm coming in and hitting him on the neck with the shuto. Okay, your level. Okay, good. Now we need to start looking at what you're actually doing to him other than just hitting things, blocking things, or whatever. Okay. If an upper, intermediate, or advanced students answers the same way, we'll tell them they need to keep on practicing because they're focusing on the moves and the technique itself is not the moves. Okay. You could change those moves 15 different ways, which is a big distinctive pattern in Shinden Fudo-ryu because you have a given pattern, but then you have three waza, not henka. You have three waza that don't look anything like, they don't look anything alike. Well, they might. Some have crossover, but usually they don't look anything like the original. And that's because you need to understand the principle and concept. You need to understand the technique, not the step-by-step form, which is why most people don't spend a lot of time with those things because they have to think more. Okay. Anyway, what's number 5? Number 5 is collapse before control. Collapse before control. That seems backwards because most people, you take control of them and you do things to get them to collapse. Okay? Takagi-Yoshin is counterintuitive. Okay. So in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, again, most people, when they think of Jutaijutsu, they think that that's just grappling, and then Daken Taijutsu, Koppo, Koshi Jutsu, whatever, that's the striking. No. Daken Taijutsu overwhelms somebody with strikes. And then they may lock them up, restrain them, execute a throw, something like that. Jutaijutsu definitely uses strikes, but they use strikes judiciously, minimum strikes to set things up, to collapse, to break their balance, to break their mindset, whatever, so that when they do the lock, hold, or throw, there's no resistance. Okay? It's like that quote I had from Shizuka Sensei. Right? When I cause that collapse, there's no resistance. Okay? So in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, we're often applying strikes before applying the joint lock or the throw. Okay, in Katamune Dori, that little technique I showed earlier, right? I come across and I hit the temple, right, and then very quickly from right here, boom, and as soon as I hit it, my hand goes straight to his hand that's grabbing, because my next move, the next big thing is executing this ura gyaku, but I actually don't. Here, boom, and then I kick. Right? I kick, and that allows me to execute the uragyaku because he's responding to the kick. See, this is a micro fluttering leaf because it catches his sight or it makes him flinch or whatever because I'm coming at his eyes, and then I double back on him. So that's his little one, right? But the whole damn kata is nothing but a fluttering leaf because everything he's responding to or trying to save himself from is not the thing that he needs to worry about, but he can't get ahead of it. Okay? And then the big throw at the end does that to him in space this way. It starts to take him that way, and then it doubles back around so his brain can't figure out which ukemi to apply. Interesting, right? So again, there's this folding mechanism, all these kind of things that allow, like that kick allows for the uragyaku to succeed because he's responding to that thing that caught his attention. That's the thing his body's trying to respond to. That actually causes the hand to loosen up because the body uses the limbs to cover damaged areas, right? All kinds of things. So we collapse the strength before we try to control him. We collapse the mental perception, the awareness, right? We collapse the plan before we try to control it. Okay? To most people, control is through force. It's either like a law or you better, or I'm going to grab a hold of you and move you, that kind of thing, right? But in Takagi-Yoshin Ryu, just like in Togaku Ryu, just like in Ninjutsu, control doesn't work that way. The ninja takes control of somebody long before that person ever realizes they lost control. And you do that by controlling their perceptions, right? You do things that get their mind in a certain place. They're defending that. They're always in the wrong place. but they're defending that thing, or they're going after that thing. And so they don't have anything for the place that you actually enter, right? It's that old cheesy thing from the movies, but the ninja actually used to use it, right? Grab a pebble, throw it into the bushes over there, so the guard wanders over to see what the hell's going on over there, and then you can sneak into the castle, right? Don't forget to not come out the same fucking way you went in, because he's going to figure it out and then call all of his buddies, and then they're going to, and because he called his buddies to help him out, now there's other gate points that are not guarded. Cool stuff, right? Anyway. Okay, so this is the thing that distinguishes this ryu's gyakuwaza from others, right? It's not just grab and twist, right? It's set up and spiraled down. Okay? We're causing a collapse in a certain area that leaves that unguarded. Okay? Mentally, physically, strength-wise, okay? Because of the way muscles contract and all that. Okay, and we'll wrap this up with one more quote here. Nagato Sensei, he says, "Structure is fragile. Okay, when you break balance, fight's already over. As long as you're exploiting that when you break it. Okay, if you give him half a second, he'll catch himself. It takes a quarter to half a second for a person to catch their balance when they trip, stumble, lose, whatever. The body catches it really, really quickly. Okay, but we're bipeds, right? That means we have 2 points of contact. We're not a four-legged dog. We're not a three-legged stool, whatever, right? We're in a constant state of shifting balance. This is like the kids with the wooden blocks and they're just stacking them up, right? This is precarious, right? Now we've got muscles that are constantly firing to keep us from standing so we can have a shitty posture and be fine. Well, we're exhausted at the end of the day, okay? Which is why we get a handle on posture. Come on, first, right? But it's very fragile because we only have 2 points of contact with the ground and we're in a constant state of shifting balance, which means we're constantly trying to neutralize the effect of gravity on us. Okay? So if we understand that, then we understand that it is imperative that we maintain ours and we disrupt his. And we disrupt it in a way that he can't get it back. Okay? So, again, this quote from him drives home the idea that the strike or disruption is what allows the gyakuwaza to succeed. Okay, collapse first, then control. Okay, all right. So that's it. These 5 principles aren't just ideas. Okay, they're embedded in every structure of the kata, either the whole thing or somewhere in there. Right. And they're definitely embodied in the one that we're going to be working on Friday, right? We're going to take Kata Munidori as our primary framework and then train how these concepts play out step by step, not just as techniques, but as tactical lessons in real world control of another human being who has free will, right? And is not going to let you do your shit, right? The only person in the world, I've said this how many times, the only person in the world is going to let you do your techniques to them is who? Your uke, right? We shouldn't be training to defend against an uke. We should be training to defend against what the uke is the surrogate for, the other person. There's points in your training where the uke goes along. That's what uke means. But at a certain point, your uke needs to change out the name. We're not an uke anymore. They're a teki. They're thinking and operating and resisting and whatnot like an attacker would. Otherwise, you're never going to pressure test your stuff. You're never going to recognize. And that's why I always tell my upper level students, when you can do these psychological perceptual control tactics to your uke, who's at your level or higher, and he knows what you're doing, but he can't stop it from happening in the moment you're doing it, now you got something. Okay? When you can catch the people who know, then, because nobody else out there, right? 99.8% of the people out there will stand a chance. Okay? So, if you found today's look at Takagi-Yoshin Ryu valuable, right, then again, you're going to want to be with me on Friday. There's the URL. Page is already set up, ready to go for you if you want to jump in. You'll see exactly how these principles, close quarter control, collapsing structure, and protecting others play out in real time, right? So you can learn to control the fight on your terms and not his. Okay? So again, principles don't change. Okay, And speaking of someone who has done both law enforcement work and having to restrain somebody, having to defend myself against real attacks, and also being in the bodyguard personal security realm and having to protect other people, principles are principles, okay? And they don't change, okay? The form of the technique may change, the clothing that we're wearing may change, what society looks like may change, but the primary conditions, right, that call for these type of actions do not change. Okay. All right. That's what I have. I will check the comments later to see if anybody popped anything in, even if you just popped in to say hi. But in the comments, do me a favor. List, what was your biggest aha moment? Okay. If you're dropping flaming shit in, I'll chuckle and just keep on moving. But if there was an aha thing, if there was something that really kind of stood out for you, or if you have any questions, post them. I try to get to them as much as possible. Either myself or my guy that runs my social media and stuff, he'll check things, and then, or some of the other guys, they'll let me know if I miss something. All right. But either way, hopefully I'll see you for the Friday class. If not, don't forget Kuden, right? If you missed this past week's Kuden, that will be on our YouTube channel. It's already there. Or if you're on the Kuden Podcast Facebook page, and just scroll down just a little bit, right? The video's there. Or if nothing else, right, I'll see you next week on Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. All right. In the meantime, train hard. If you're local, I'll see you in class.